On the morning of September 19, 1944, Lieutenant Edwin Leipa of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion crested Hill 246 near Rechicourt-la-Petite in eastern France and found himself staring at something he had been trained his entire military career to destroy. Through the dense fog that blanketed the rolling hills of Lorraine, a German Panther tank emerged from the tree line at the base of the hill. Then another. Then 5 more. Leipa commanded 4 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, vehicles so lightly armored that a well-placed rifle shot could penetrate their sides. His crews had been in France for barely a month. The Panthers advancing toward them represented the pinnacle of German armored engineering, machines that American tankers had learned to fear and respect in equal measure. Each Panther mounted a 75mm gun capable of destroying a Sherman tank at ranges exceeding a mile. Their sloped armor could shrug off most American tank rounds fired head-on. What happened in the next 5 minutes would fundamentally challenge everything German tank commanders thought they understood about American armored warfare. Sergeant Stacy, commanding the lead Hellcat, opened fire first. The Panther at the base of the hill erupted in flames. Before the German column could react, Stacy's gun spoke again. A second Panther died. The battle that followed at Aricourt over the next 11 days would see American tank destroyer units achieve something remarkable. They would destroy 39 German tanks while losing only 4 of their own vehicles. The kill ratio was nearly 10-1. But the numbers alone missed the deeper story. In the months following Aricourt, in the desperate fighting around Bastogne, in the grinding advance through Germany itself, a pattern emerged in German after-action reports and officer diaries. The Americans, it turned out, had built tank destroyers that forced German commanders to completely rethink their tactical assumptions. These were not the crude weapons German intelligence had initially assessed. They were purpose-built tank killers that combined speed, firepower, and tactical doctrine in ways that German armor doctrine had not anticipated. This is the story of how American tank destroyers earned the respect of the very officers sent to destroy them. It is a story told through German eyes, written in their own assessments, and it reveals a fundamental shift in armored warfare that neither side fully understood when the war began. The central question is not whether American tank destroyers were effective. The historical record proves they were. The question is why German officers, who commanded superior tanks and fought from the defensive, came to view these lightly armored American vehicles with something approaching professional admiration. The answer requires understanding what American tank destroyers actually were, how they were supposed to fight, and why the Germans had every reason to believe they would fail. When Germany unleashed its blitzkrieg across Poland in September of 1939, military observers around the world watched in shock as armored spearheads tore through prepared defenses with unprecedented speed. Within weeks, coordinated attacks by massed tank formations supported by dive bombers had shattered the Polish army. The following spring, the same tactics demolished French and British forces in a campaign that lasted just 6 weeks. American military planners absorbed these lessons with growing alarm. The United States Army of 1940 possessed fewer than 400 tanks, most of them obsolete. If America entered the war, it would face German panzer divisions that had perfected the art of armored breakthrough. The question was how to counter mass tank attacks without building an equally massive tank force, which would take years the nation did not have. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Bruce, a cavalry officer who understood mobility and firepower, proposed a controversial solution. Instead of matching German tanks with American tanks, he argued for creating specialized tank destroyer units. These would be lighter, faster vehicles mounting powerful anti-tank guns. They would not fight toe-to-toe with enemy armor. Instead, they would race to threatened sectors, establish ambush positions, and destroy enemy tanks with concentrated fire before withdrawing to the next position. The tank destroyer force that emerged from Bruce's vision embodied a distinctly American approach to warfare. Where German doctrine emphasized the tank as a breakthrough weapon, American doctrine treated tanks primarily as infantry support. The job of killing other tanks would belong to a separate force altogether. This division of labor appealed to Army Ground Forces Commander Leslie McNair, who championed the concept with bureaucratic fervor. By 1942, the tank destroyer force had grown into a massive organization fielding more than 100 battalions and employing over 100,000 men. Each battalion controlled 36 tank destroyers organized into 3 companies. The force operated under a simple doctrinal principle: seek, strike, and destroy. Tank destroyer units would be held in reserve behind the front lines. When German panzers broke through, the destroyers would race forward, take up concealed positions, and ambush the enemy from the flanks. The concept looked brilliant on paper. It assumed that German attacks would come in the form of massed armored breakthroughs, exactly as they had in France and Poland. It assumed that American forces would fight defensively, holding ground while tank destroyers counterattacked enemy armor. Most critically, it assumed that speed and surprise could compensate for weak armor protection. German intelligence officers studying American tank destroyer doctrine in late 1942 saw exactly what they expected to see: yet another flawed Allied response to German tactical superiority. The reports that reached Wehrmacht headquarters described lightly armored vehicles with open-top turrets and guns that German analysis suggested would struggle against the newest Panther and Tiger tanks. American tank destroyer tactics, the assessments concluded, were doctrinally sound for defensive operations but would prove vulnerable once German forces seized the initiative. What those German intelligence assessments missed was that American industry was about to produce 3 distinct tank destroyer designs, each solving different tactical problems. And more importantly, American crews would not fight according to doctrine. They would improvise, adapt, and develop tactics that would force German commanders to reconsider everything they thought they knew about armored warfare. The M10 Wolverine was the first purpose-built American tank destroyer to see widespread combat. Based on the Sherman tank chassis, it mounted a 3-inch naval gun in an open-topped turret. The vehicle weighed 29 tons and could reach speeds of 30 miles per hour. Its gun could penetrate 92 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards under ideal conditions. When M10s first arrived in North Africa in 1943, German panzer crews initially dismissed them. The vehicles looked like poorly armored Shermans with different turrets. The open top seemed like a fatal design flaw, exposing crews to artillery fire and grenades. German tank commanders who encountered M10s in Tunisia assumed they were fighting improvised weapons cobbled together from available parts. Then the M10s started killing German tanks. At the Battle of El Geta in March of 1943, the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion demonstrated what concentrated anti-tank fire could accomplish. German forces launched a major armored counterattack against American positions. The 601st, equipped with M10s, was positioned on the American flanks exactly as doctrine prescribed. When German tanks advanced, they drove directly into a carefully planned kill zone. The M10s opened fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. German tank crews, accustomed to fighting at closer ranges in North African terrain, found themselves under accurate fire before they could effectively return it. The 601st destroyed more than 30 German tanks and assault guns in a single engagement. Erwin Rommel, commanding Axis forces in North Africa, noted the effectiveness of American artillery in a letter to his wife dated February 18, 1943. He described how observation planes directed battery fire on worthwhile targets throughout the combat zone. What Rommel observed was not just artillery but the entire American fire direction system, which included tank destroyers functioning as mobile anti-tank guns. The coordination impressed him. But the M10 had limitations that became increasingly apparent as the war progressed. Its 3-inch gun, while adequate against German Panzer Mark III and Mark IV tanks, struggled against the thick frontal armor of Panthers. The open turret, while providing excellent visibility, left crews exposed to indirect fire. Most critically, the M10 weighed nearly 30 tons, making it slower and less maneuverable than Bruce's original vision demanded. The vehicle that came closest to Bruce's ideal emerged from the BIC design team in 1943. The M18 Hellcat was purpose-built for speed. Where the M10 used a Sherman chassis, the M18 started from a clean sheet. Every design decision prioritized mobility. The result was a vehicle that could reach 55 miles per hour on roads, making it the fastest tracked armored vehicle in American service. The Hellcat mounted a 76mm gun in a powered turret that could traverse 360 degrees in 24 seconds. The entire vehicle weighed just 17 tons, nearly 12 tons lighter than an M10. This extraordinary speed came at a cost. The Hellcat's armor was barely 1 inch thick at its thickest points. German anti-tank weapons could penetrate it at virtually any angle from any range. The vehicle was, in essence, a very fast gun with just enough armor to stop rifle bullets. When the first M18s arrived in England in early 1944, General Omar Bradley refused them. His tank destroyer battalions already operated M10s, and he saw no reason to trade proven vehicles for untested ones with inadequate armor. The M18s were diverted to General George Patton's Third Army, where they would prove their worth in the most unlikely circumstances. The third American tank destroyer, the M36 Jackson, married the M10's chassis to a 90mm anti-aircraft gun. This weapon could penetrate 135mm of armor at 1,000 yards, making it capable of destroying any German tank from the front at combat ranges. The M36 began reaching Europe in limited numbers in autumn of 1944. German intelligence reports from this period note the appearance of American tank destroyers with unexpectedly powerful main armament. By September of 1944, when Lieutenant Leiper crested that hill near Rechicourt-la-Petite, American tank destroyer doctrine had already begun to diverge sharply from the theoretical model envisioned in 1942. Instead of being held in reserve to counter massed breakthrough attacks, destroyer battalions were attached directly to armored divisions. Instead of fighting defensively, they advanced alongside assault elements. Most importantly, instead of withdrawing after firing a few shots, crews learned to maneuver aggressively, using speed and terrain to offset their thin armor. The battle that was about to unfold at Aricourt would demonstrate all of these tactical innovations in combat against some of Germany's finest panzer units. For the German officers commanding those units, the experience would be profoundly educational. The road network around Aricourt in eastern France represented a critical strategic objective in September of 1944. General Patton's Third Army had torn across France in an audacious exploitation operation, advancing faster than any American army in history. By mid-September, his spearhead divisions were running low on fuel and ammunition. They had outrun their supply lines by hundreds of miles. Patton's advance had ground to a halt just short of the German border. Adolf Hitler saw an opportunity. If German forces could counterattack and retake the Moselle River crossings around Aricourt, they could cut off Patton's advanced units and force the Americans into a defensive posture. More importantly, a successful counterattack might demonstrate that the German army still possessed offensive power, potentially influencing political negotiations. Hitler ordered General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army to assemble for a major armored offensive. The force Manteufel assembled represented a cross-section of Germany's remaining armored strength. The 11th Panzer Division, though understrength, consisted of veteran units. The 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades were newly formed organizations equipped with the latest Panther tanks. On paper, the German force fielded 262 tanks and assault guns, giving them local superiority over the American 4th Armored Division defending the sector. German planning for the Aricourt counteroffensive reflected both confidence and desperation. Manteufel's staff assumed that American units, having advanced so rapidly, would be disorganized and vulnerable. Intelligence reports indicated that the 4th Armored Division was understrength and badly in need of rest and refitting. German commanders believed they could achieve tactical surprise by attacking through morning fog that would ground American aircraft. What German intelligence failed to properly assess was the combat power of American tank destroyer battalions attached to armored divisions. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats, had been assigned to support Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division. The unit had arrived in France in August and participated in the breakout from Normandy. Its crews were experienced, well-trained, and importantly, they had learned to fight in ways that tactical manuals never envisioned. On September 18, 1944, the first German armored probes began. The 111th Panzer Brigade, equipped with Panther tanks, advanced toward the American positions near Luneville. American scouts detected the German movement and called for support. What followed was a fierce meeting engagement that gave both sides their first taste of the battle to come. American forces at Luneville, including elements of the 2nd Cavalry Group and reserve units from the 4th Armored Division, destroyed 24 German armored vehicles in sharp fighting. The Germans had expected to brush aside screening forces and penetrate deep into American rear areas. Instead, they found themselves in a grinding fight against well-positioned defenders supported by concentrated artillery fire. Major General John Wood, commanding the 4th Armored Division, recognized the German attack for what it was, not a local counterattack but a major offensive operation. He ordered his forces to establish defensive positions around Aracourt while requesting reinforcements. The terrain around Aracourt consisted of gently rolling farmland with small villages and scattered woodlots. This open ground favored the defender, particularly defenders equipped with mobile anti-tank weapons and excellent observation. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion deployed into positions covering the approaches to Aracourt. Company C, under Captain Thomas Evans, established firing positions on the high ground overlooking potential German approach routes. The Hellcat crews had learned through hard experience that their thin armor meant they could not trade shots with German tanks at close range. Their tactical advantage lay in speed, observation, and the ability to concentrate fire from multiple vehicles on individual targets. On the morning of September 19th, dense fog blanketed the battlefield. The weather was exactly what German commanders had requested for their attack. Panthers from the 113th Panzer Brigade began moving toward Aracourt before dawn, confident that the fog would conceal their advance from American observers and ground American aircraft. Lieutenant Leeper's platoon of 4 M18s from Company C had positioned itself on Hill 246 during the night. When dawn broke, visibility was less than 100 feet. Leeper could hear the rumble of German tanks moving through the fog but could not see them. He ordered his crews to hold fire and wait. As the fog began to lift slightly, Leeper spotted the gun muzzle of a German tank emerging from the tree line barely 30 feet away. The Panther was so close that Leeper could have hit it with a thrown rock. For a moment that probably felt like an eternity, both sides were blind to each other. Then the fog parted just enough. Sergeant Stace's Hellcat fired first. The 76mm high-velocity round caught the Panther in its side armor, the weakest point. The German tank exploded. Stacy traversed his turret and fired again. A second Panther died. The gun crew reloaded with practiced efficiency. A third German tank exploded. The remaining Panthers in the column, suddenly realizing they were under fire from concealed positions, attempted to maneuver. German doctrine emphasized aggressive action when ambushed. The Panther commanders began moving their vehicles to flank the American position, exactly as their training dictated. But the Hellcats had one decisive advantage. They could move faster than the Panthers could traverse their guns. Leeper's remaining 3 M18s opened fire from different positions. The Germans found themselves taking fire from multiple directions. Within 5 minutes, 5 Panthers were burning wrecks. 1 Hellcat had been destroyed by return fire, but the engagement was over. The surviving German tanks withdrew toward their assembly area. For the German commanders of the 113th Panzer Brigade, the morning's events were deeply troubling. They had advanced with the latest German tanks, vehicles superior in almost every measurable way to American armor. They had achieved tactical surprise, catching American forces in heavy fog. They had local numerical superiority. Yet they had lost 5 tanks in minutes to a handful of lightly armored American vehicles. The after-action reports filed by German officers following this engagement reveal a growing realization that American tank destroyers represented a more serious threat than initial intelligence had suggested. The vehicles were faster than expected. Their guns were effective at combat ranges. Most critically, American crews demonstrated tactical proficiency and aggressive maneuvering that German doctrine associated with experienced panzer units, not defensive anti-tank forces. If you're finding this exploration of World War II armor warfare as compelling as we hoped, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these detailed historical narratives to light. Over the next 10 days, the battle around Aracourt intensified. German forces launched repeated attacks against American positions. Each attack followed a similar pattern. German tanks would advance toward what appeared to be weakly held positions. American defenders would call for support. Tank destroyer units would race to the threatened sector, establish ambush positions, and engage German armor at ranges where American guns were effective. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion's Company C was involved in nearly continuous fighting. On September 20th, German Panthers moved toward Combat Command A's headquarters near Aracourt itself. Captain Evans led his Hellcats in a daring maneuver, using one platoon as bait to draw German tanks forward while the other two platoons maneuvered into flanking positions. The Germans, focused on the lead platoon, failed to notice the other Hellcats until too late. The tactic worked. Over the course of that day, Company C destroyed 19 German tanks while losing 7 Hellcats. The exchange ratio favored the Americans, but more importantly, the speed and violence of the American counterattacks disrupted German offensive operations. Panzer commanders found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, worried about ambush from fast-moving American tank destroyers. A captured German lieutenant from the 113th Panzer Brigade, interrogated by American intelligence officers, described the fighting around Aracourt with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. The American tank destroyers, he reported, fought nothing like the defensive anti-tank units German forces had encountered in Russia. They moved constantly, refused to hold static positions, and attacked from unexpected directions. Their speed made them difficult to pin down with artillery fire. The lieutenant's assessment highlighted a fundamental shift in American armor tactics that German doctrine had not anticipated. Tank destroyer doctrine, as written, called for units to establish prepared positions and engage enemy armor from concealment. The reality at Aracourt was far more dynamic. Hellcat commanders treated their vehicles as mobile tank hunters, aggressively seeking out German armor and engaging in running gun battles. This tactical evolution reflected the combat experience of American crews. They had learned that their vehicles' light armor meant they could not survive prolonged firefights. But they had also learned that their speed and powered turrets gave them advantages in meeting engagements. A Hellcat moving at 30 miles per hour could traverse terrain faster than a Panther could rotate its turret. This speed advantage, combined with good crew training, turned what appeared to be a defensive weapon into an offensive tank killer. By September 25th, the German offensive around Aracourt had effectively failed. Of the 262 German tanks and assault guns committed to the operation, only 54 remained operational. American forces, including the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, had destroyed over 200 armored vehicles in 11 days of fighting. The 4th Armored Division, which German planners had assessed as vulnerable and disorganized, had conducted a textbook defense. The Battle of Aracourt became a case study in how armor forces with inferior vehicles could defeat numerically and qualitatively superior opponents through superior tactics, training, and the intelligent use of terrain. For the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, the engagement validated the concept of the fast tank destroyer. Company C alone claimed 90 enemy armored vehicles destroyed by the end of the war in Europe. But Aracourt was not an isolated engagement. The tactical lessons learned there would be tested again in far more desperate circumstances when German forces launched their final major offensive of the war 3 months later. On the morning of December 16, 1944, Germany launched its final major offensive of the war. Operation Wattam Rhine, which Allied forces would call the Battle of the Bulge, struck with overwhelming force through the Ardennes forest. 24 German divisions, including 10 panzer divisions fielding approximately 1,500 tanks and assault guns, smashed into thinly held American positions. The attack achieved tactical surprise. Fog and snow grounded Allied aircraft. German forces drove deep into American lines, creating a bulge in the front that threatened to split the Allied armies and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. The offensive represented Germany's last gasp. The panzers committed to this attack represented nearly everything the Reich could scrape together from its battered armored forces. If the offensive succeeded, it might force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. If it failed, Germany's armored capability in the West would be effectively destroyed. At Bastogne, a critical road junction in Belgium, American forces found themselves surrounded. The 101st Airborne Division, a light infantry formation without organic armor, had rushed to the town just ahead of German spearheads. Major General Anthony McAuliffe's paratroopers dug in around the crossroads, but they had virtually no heavy weapons capable of stopping German tanks. Without armor support, the 101st faced annihilation. Into this desperate situation came the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton. The battalion had been in reserve 60 miles north when orders came on December 18 to move south immediately and reinforce Bastogne. The 705th was equipped with M18 Hellcats, the same fast tank destroyers that had proven so effective at Aracourt 3 months earlier. By the evening of December 19, after a harrowing march through roads choked with refugees and retreating units, the battalion had reached Bastogne. Templeton was formally attached to the 101st Airborne Division on December 20, just as German forces completed the encirclement. For the paratroopers of the 101st, the arrival of the 705th represented a lifeline. The battalion's 36 Hellcats provided the only mobile anti-tank capability inside the perimeter. A platoon of 4 M18s was attached to each of the 101st's regiments, with additional platoons held in reserve. The paratroopers, trained for vertical assault operations, had little experience working with armor. The tank destroyer crews, most of whom had never fought alongside airborne infantry, faced the challenge of coordinating with an unfamiliar formation under the worst possible circumstances. The Germans attacked almost immediately. On December 20, elements of the 2nd Panzer Division probed American positions north of Bastogne near the village of Neuville. The attack represented a test. If German commanders could seize Neuville quickly, they could unhinge the entire American defense and roll into Bastogne from the north. The defenders at Neuville consisted of Team Dessabry, a battalion-sized task force from the 10th Armored Division, along with the 1st Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Supporting them were 4 M18 Hellcats from the 705th Reconnaissance Company. Major William Dessabry, commanding the position, had been told to hold Neuville at all costs. When German tanks appeared through the morning fog on December 20, the 4 Hellcats went into action immediately. The crews had positioned their vehicles in the southern edge of the village with clear fields of fire toward the German approach routes. Through the thick fog, the tank destroyer gunners could hear German armor massing but could see almost nothing. For 2 hours, they fired blindly in the general direction of engine sounds, hoping to disrupt German assembly areas. At 10 o'clock, the fog lifted suddenly. 15 German tanks stood exposed in the fields within 1,000 yards of the American positions. The tanks, a mix of Panthers and Panzer IVs, had been maneuvering for position when visibility improved. For several seconds, both sides stared at each other in mutual surprise. Then the Hellcats opened fire. The engagement was savage and brief. The 4 M18s, firing from prepared positions with good observation, systematically destroyed German tanks. Their 76mm guns proved effective at ranges where German return fire was less accurate. Within minutes, multiple German tanks were burning. The surviving panzers withdrew toward their assembly areas, leaving behind destroyed vehicles and wounded crewmen. But the Germans were not finished at Neuville. Throughout the day, they launched repeated attacks supported by artillery and infantry. The defenders, under constant pressure, called for reinforcements. Additional Hellcats from the 705th raced north to support the position. The tank destroyer crews fought through intense small arms fire, their open turrets leaving them exposed to snipers and artillery fragments. Several crews suffered casualties from shell splinters that penetrated the thin armor. By evening on December 20th, Team Dessabry and the paratroopers had destroyed approximately 30 German tanks around Neuville. The 705th had lost several M18s to German fire, but the exchange ratio heavily favored the Americans. More importantly, the defense of Neuville had bought crucial time for the 101st to organize defenses around Bastogne itself. The German 2nd Panzer Division, convinced it faced a much stronger force than actually defended the village, pulled back to reorganize. The division commander, believing American reserves were flooding into the sector, decided to bypass Neuville rather than waste more armor in frontal attacks. German officers writing after-action reports following the Neuville engagement noted something unexpected. The American tank destroyers had fought with an aggressiveness that German doctrine associated with offensive operations, not defensive fighting. They had maneuvered under fire, established new firing positions rapidly, and coordinated effectively with infantry. One captured German officer told interrogators that the American crews seemed to anticipate where German tanks would appear and had prepared ambush positions accordingly. The siege of Bastogne lasted 8 days. During that time, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion fought in nearly continuous action. The battalion's Hellcats raced from threatened sector to threatened sector, reinforcing positions under attack and destroying German armor wherever it appeared. On Christmas Day, 1944, German forces launched a major attack against the American perimeter. 18 Panzer IVs from the 15th Panzergrenadier Division advanced toward the village of Champs on Bastone's western side. 4 M18s from the 705th intercepted them. The tank destroyer crews used terrain and speed to maximum advantage. Instead of fighting from static positions, they maneuvered continuously, forcing the German tanks to expose their flanks while seeking targets. The Hellcats would fire a few rounds, then displace to new positions before German guns could range them. This tactic, which crews had developed through hard experience, exploited the M18's superior speed. A Hellcat moving at 30 miles per hour could cross terrain faster than a Panzer IV could traverse its turret. German gunners found themselves constantly adjusting aim against targets that refused to stay still. By the end of Christmas Day, the 705th had destroyed most of the attacking German armor. The defense of Champs held. Across the Bastogne perimeter, similar engagements played out as German forces probed for weaknesses. In each case, the Hellcats provided the mobile firepower necessary to defeat German armor. By January 18, 1945, when the 101st was finally relieved, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion had destroyed approximately 40 German tanks while losing only 6 M18s. The presidential unit citation the battalion later received recognized not just the kill ratio but the tactical innovation the crews had demonstrated. German commanders writing operational assessments after the Battle of the Bulge repeatedly mentioned American tank destroyer effectiveness. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, noted in his post-war interrogation that American tank destroyers had proven far more effective than German intelligence had predicted. Their speed allowed them to concentrate forces at threatened points faster than German armor could exploit breakthroughs. Their guns, while lighter than German tank armament, proved adequate when used from ambush positions against flank and rear armor. A German tactical report captured in early January of 1945, distributed to panzer units in the West, contained specific warnings about American tank destroyers. The report noted that these vehicles operated differently than traditional anti-tank guns. They did not hold static positions. They appeared suddenly, engaged from unexpected angles, and withdrew before counterfire could be organized. German tank commanders were advised to treat American tank destroyers as they would treat enemy tanks, as mobile threats requiring immediate attention. What made these assessments remarkable was the respect they conveyed. German armored doctrine had been refined through years of combat on multiple fronts. German tank commanders had faced the best Soviet anti-tank weapons, British tank destroyers, and American Shermans. They knew armor warfare intimately. Yet here they were, warning their units about a weapon system they had initially dismissed as inferior. The grudging professional respect in these assessments revealed how thoroughly American tank destroyer crews had proven their worth. The M36 Jackson, arriving in combat in limited numbers during autumn of 1944, represented the final evolution of American tank destroyer design. Where the M10 had struggled against heavy German armor and the M18 had sacrificed protection for speed, the M36 combined adequate mobility with a 90mm gun capable of destroying any German tank at combat ranges. The weapon was essentially a scaled-up anti-aircraft gun, the same 90mm that would later arm the M26 Pershing heavy tank. 3 tank destroyer battalions received M36s in time for the Battle of the Bulge: the 610th, 703rd, and 740th. These units proved their worth immediately. At St. Vith, a crucial road junction on the northern shoulder of the German offensive, M36s from the 740 Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged Panthers and Tiger IIS at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The 90mm gun could penetrate Panther turret armor at 1,500 yards, giving American crews a standoff capability they had previously lacked. A captured German after-action report from the battle around St. Vith, written by an officer from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, described an engagement with American tank destroyers equipped with what German intelligence had not yet identified as 90mm guns. The report noted that German Panthers advancing towards St. Vith came under fire at extreme range from concealed positions. Several tanks were destroyed before they could identify the source of fire. When German forces maneuvered to flank the American positions, the enemy vehicles withdrew at high speed, only to reappear at new positions minutes later. The report concluded that these American weapons represented a significant threat that required careful tactical handling. On December 1, 1944, Lieutenant Alfred Rose of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion commanded an M36 Jackson positioned between the German villages of Prummen and Suggerath. While familiarizing himself with the turret controls, Rose spotted a German Panther moving in the distance. Using the range-finding grid in his gunner's sight, he calculated the distance at 400 to 600 yards, more than 2.5 miles. Rose fired 2 ranging rounds to verify the distance, then scored a direct hit with his third shot. He continued firing armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds until the Panther was destroyed. 400 to 600 yards. The shot represented one of the longest tank kills of World War II, achieved with a weapon the Germans had initially assessed as inadequate. The engagement demonstrated not just the capability of the 90mm gun, but the training and skill of American tank destroyer crews. Hitting a target at that range required precise range estimation, understanding of ballistics, and the ability to adjust fire based on fall of shot. These were skills that took months to develop, skills that German intelligence had assumed American crews would not possess. Throughout the closing months of the war, as Allied armies pushed into Germany itself, tank destroyer battalions evolved into general-purpose fire support units. The threat of massed German armored counterattacks had diminished as Germany's panzer forces were systematically destroyed. Tank destroyer crews found themselves supporting infantry assaults, engaging fortified positions, and providing mobile artillery fire. The vehicles that had been designed for a specific doctrinal role now served wherever their mobile firepower was needed. If you're finding this deep dive into World War II armored warfare as compelling as we hoped, we'd be grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these detailed historical narratives to you, and we have many more stories from the Second World War yet to tell. German officers captured in the final months of the war, when asked about American military effectiveness, frequently mentioned tank destroyer units. A Panzer-led division officer interrogated in March of 1945 described American tank destroyers as the most dangerous anti-tank weapon his units had faced. He noted that while German tanks had superior armor and, in some cases, superior guns, American tank destroyer tactics consistently outmaneuvered German formations. The Americans, he said, fought with their heads, not just their courage. This assessment cut to the heart of why American tank destroyers had earned German respect. The vehicles themselves, taken individually, were not technological marvels. The M10 was essentially a Sherman with a different turret. The M18 sacrificed protection for speed in ways that German doctrine would have considered reckless. The M36 arrived too late and in too few numbers to dominate the battlefield. But American crews had learned to fight in ways that maximized their vehicle strengths while minimizing weaknesses. They used terrain, speed, and careful positioning to defeat technically superior opponents. The tactical innovations developed by tank destroyer crews represented a broader pattern in American military operations. American doctrine emphasized flexibility, initiative, and problem-solving over rigid adherence to established procedures. When tank destroyer battalions arrived in combat theaters, their prescribed role, destroying massed enemy tank breakthroughs, rarely materialized. German forces in France and Germany fought defensively, not offensively. Rather than wait for missions that never came, tank destroyer units adapted. They learned to support armor advances, defend against local counterattacks, engage fortified positions, and provide mobile firepower wherever needed. This adaptability impressed German officers who had been trained in a more rigid system. German doctrine worked brilliantly when conditions matched planning assumptions. But when the situation changed, when American industrial capacity created overwhelming material superiority, when Allied air power dominated the battlefield, German commanders found themselves constrained by doctrine that no longer fit reality. American tank destroyer crews, by contrast, simply improvised new tactics. By the war's end in May of 1945, American tank destroyer battalions had destroyed thousands of German armored vehicles. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion alone claimed over 600 enemy tanks and assault guns destroyed. The 705th received a Presidential Unit Citation for its defense of Bastogne. Dozens of other battalions earned unit citations and battle honors. The exchange ratios, vehicles destroyed versus vehicles lost, consistently favored American units. But the numbers alone miss the deeper story. German officers had entered the war convinced of their tactical and technological superiority. They had destroyed the French army in 6 weeks. They had driven British forces off the continent at Dunkirk. They had smashed deep into the Soviet Union, destroying thousands of tanks in vast encirclement battles. German confidence in their armored forces was not arrogance. It was based on years of spectacular success against multiple enemies. American tank destroyers forced German officers to reconsider these assumptions. Here was a weapon system that German doctrine had not anticipated, used in ways German tactical manuals did not describe, achieving results that German intelligence had deemed impossible. The lightly armored vehicles that should have been death traps became highly effective tank killers. The crews who should have been poorly trained performed with skill and aggression. The tactics that should have failed, aggressive maneuvering in vehicles with thin armor, consistently succeeded. In the archives of captured German military documents, among the tactical reports and after-action assessments, a pattern emerges. German officers stopped dismissing American tank destroyers and started analyzing them. The reports contain detailed observations about American tactics, careful notes about engagement ranges, specific warnings about underestimating these units. The tone shifts from contempt to respect, from overconfidence to professional wariness. This evolution in German thinking represents an unspoken admission. They had been wrong about American military capability. The story of American tank destroyers during World War II reveals something fundamental about warfare itself. Technical superiority matters, but it is not decisive. The best tank, the thickest armor, the most powerful gun, none of these guarantee victory if tactical employment is flawed. American tank destroyer crews understood this instinctively. They knew their vehicles were vulnerable. They knew German tanks had advantages in armor and firepower. So they stopped trying to fight on German terms and invented their own. Speed became armor. If a Hellcat could reach a flanking position before a Panther could rotate its turret, then the Panther's thick frontal armor became irrelevant. Terrain became protection. If a Jackson could engage from a concealed position at 1,500 yards, then German return fire had to find the target before it could destroy it. Aggression became defense. If tank destroyer platoons attacked German armor formations instead of waiting to be attacked, they could disrupt enemy operations before breakthroughs occurred. These tactical innovations were not planned in Washington or developed at training centers. They emerged from crews learning what worked through trial, error, and bitter experience. Young men, most of them civilians in uniform barely 2 years earlier, figured out how to defeat professional German tank commanders using vehicles that should have been inferior. They survived by being smarter, faster, and more adaptable than their enemy. And in the process, they forced that enemy to respect their capabilities. The legacy of American tank destroyers extends beyond their combat record. The tank destroyer force as an institution was disbanded shortly after the war, its doctrine deemed obsolete in an era of atomic weapons and mobile armor. But the lessons its units learned, about flexibility, about aggressive tactics, about maximizing strengths while compensating for weaknesses, these lessons influenced American armor doctrine for decades. The emphasis on speed and firepower over armor protection would shape American tank design through the Cold War. The preference for mobile defense over static fortifications would characterize American tactical thinking in multiple conflicts. German officers who wrote about their experiences fighting American forces almost always mentioned the material superiority Allied armies enjoyed. They discussed the overwhelming numbers of tanks, the unlimited artillery ammunition, the complete air superiority. These were real advantages that German forces could not match. But buried in these assessments are observations about American tactical skill, about units that fought with intelligence and adaptability, about crews who learned from mistakes and adjusted their methods. The tank destroyer battalions exemplified these qualities. When Lieutenant Edwin Leiper crested that hill near Rechicourt-la-Petite on September 19, 1944, he commanded 4 lightly armored vehicles facing German Panthers. By every conventional measure, his platoon should have been destroyed. The Germans had superior tanks, better armor, more powerful guns. But within 5 minutes, 5 Panthers were burning. Rex and Leaper's platoon had demonstrated what American tank destroyer crews would prove repeatedly over the next 8 months. That courage, skill, and smart tactics could defeat technological superiority. The German officers who faced these units learned this lesson the hard way. Their after-action reports, their tactical assessments, their warnings to other units, all reflect a grudging professional respect for an enemy they had initially underestimated. They stopped dismissing American tank destroyer crews as inferior and started treating them as serious threats requiring careful tactical handling. In the language of military professionals, this shift from contempt to respect represents the highest form of acknowledgment. The central irony of American tank destroyers is that they succeeded by ignoring the doctrine that created them. Tank destroyer force planners had envisioned units held in reserve, responding to massed enemy breakthroughs, fighting defensively from prepared positions. The reality was aggressive maneuver, offensive action, and constant adaptation to circumstances planners had never imagined. The crews who drove M10s, M18s, and M36s into combat did not fight according to the manual. They fought according to what worked. And what worked, it turned out, was using their vehicle's strengths, speed, and firepower to compensate for their most obvious weakness, thin armor. German officers recognized this tactical innovation because they understood armor warfare at a professional level. They knew how difficult it was to maneuver effectively under fire. They knew the courage required to attack in vehicles that could be penetrated by anti-tank weapons at almost any angle. They knew the skill needed to hit moving targets at combat ranges. When they saw American tank destroyer crews doing all of these things successfully, repeatedly, against veteran German units, they could not dismiss it as luck or material superiority. They had to acknowledge that American crews had learned to fight very well indeed. This is the story told through German eyes, written in their assessments and recorded in their warnings. It is a story of professional soldiers recognizing skill in their opponents. It is a story of tactical innovation defeating technological superiority. And it is a story of young American crews earning the respect of experienced German officers through demonstrated competence under the worst possible conditions. The title of this video asks what German officers wrote about American tank destroyers. The answer is simpler than the complex history suggests. They wrote about them with respect. If you found this exploration of World War II armor combat engaging, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We have many more untold stories from the Second World War, and your support helps us continue bringing these narratives to light. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspect of armored warfare would you like us to explore next? Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.